The broadcast of the regular scheduled meeting of the Charter Commission Amendment Review Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Government Structure Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. For the record, my name is Peter Ginder, and I'm the chair of the Charter Commission's Amendments Review Committee, and I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Cohen. Commissioner Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Metke.
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Here.
Commission Chair Clegg.
Here.
Commissioner Cohen. Chair Ginder.
Here.
There are 5 members present.
Commissioners, on the agenda for today's meeting is before us, and could I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Matchy.
Second, Rubenstein.
Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Cohen. Commissioner Kozak.
Aye.
Commissioner Metke.
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Cohen. Chair Ginder.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Next on the agenda is the chair's report. Very briefly, there's not much to report. As members of this committee are aware, there originally were 2 matters that were referred to this committee. One was an amendment to get rid of the park board. That proposal was withdrawn by the proponent, and that's not before us. What we have before us today then is the only discussion item on today's agenda, which is the potential amendment to eliminate the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Before we get into the discussion, I would just like to offer some preliminary statements. One, I think I sent to all members of the committee the results of a discussion from the League of Women Voters that summarized also that in 2009, I believe it was, that there was similarly a motion, a referendum on the idea of getting rid of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. That amendment failed roughly 65% to 35%, and it was pretty strongly opposed at the time by the Park Board. I offer that as some background as we move into the discussion of this, because it seems to me to a degree that in light of the relative recency of the last referendum on this matter, that one of the things we have is that it may be a bit early to bring this forward again. I don't know if there's a similar opposition from the Park Board, and the charter itself has changed with the introduction of the new plain language charter since that time. And to start the discussion also, I would note that I've had a chance to review this, and I'll offer a couple of preliminary comments before we open this to larger discussion. One is the proposed amendment does not completely capture all of the mentions of the Board of Estimate and Taxation in the charter, so it's not complete or accurate as it sets. And secondly, it does make a significant change in that it proposes that before a budget can be passed by either the Park Board or the City Council, it has to be done by a 2/3 majority of the council with the mayor agreeing. That is not as what currently happens when you pass a budget. It's a simple majority, or excuse me, an absolute majority of the council, and you would get to a 2/3 majority only if the mayor were to veto it. So with that background, I'm certainly glad to hear the perspectives of the parties here, of the commissioners. I believe we have several options. One is we can decide whether we want to move forward on this and make a recommendation to the full charter, whether we want to move forward on this. We also need to decide if we want to try and do this as something that we would look towards putting on the ballot for this election year, or is it something that we would want to put off later because of the number of items that will be on the ballot regarding the charter this year, and put it off for a couple of years to the next general election. So with that, I'm concluding with my remarks and opening it up to the commissioners. Commissioner Kozak, I see, has raised his hand.
I'll defer to Commissioner Mecke.
Okay.
I think she had her hand up. She beat me to it.
Not by much, though. I think it's something worth looking into, but not at this time with the amendments that we have on the charter. I think moving it to a further election and having some discussion on it and maybe research and public hearings. And I think with it not being complete, that it probably should come back to us complete.
Commissioner Kozak.
I guess I concur with what Commissioner Mecke said, because it sounds like there are some missing pieces, as you acknowledge, Mr. Chair. I also wonder what is the genesis of this proposal? Where did it come from?
My understanding, this is from a couple of members of the public, one of whom was a former member of the Board of Investment Taxation.
Wally.
Yeah, and I don't recall the background of the other person who had brought this forward.
Okay.
So it's again, it's not a petition. It's a proposal from a couple of citizens that we don't have to do anything on, or we can decide it's a good idea and move forward on. And again, I'll just interject for the moment. I believe it's an idea worth studying, that the Board of Estimate is kind of past its prime. It's deep in its history. It was put in there because the legislators didn't fully trust the city council. And as a practical matter, now the city council is the one that catches all the grief about the budget, pros and cons. And really, unless you're an aficionado of the city workings, nobody really knows what the Board of Estimate does. So I think it's something worth considering. But if there are other members or other charter commission members that have further comments.
Let me just, if I can, very briefly. Number one, I think that we're going to have at least 2, maybe even 3 amendments on the ballot. I think probably it's more likely to have 3. And the longer that ballot becomes, the less attention each individual item gets. And I agree with this is a serious proposal, but I think it's putting it off for 2 years is not going to be the end of the world. And we need a long discussion, because I know there are people who truly believe in it, because we've heard from some of those folks over the last several years. But the idea, as I understand it, the 2/3 to pass a budget, boy, that's an awful uphill climb, and too often, and that's for deadlock. That's a prescription for deadlock, and I don't think we need that. And if there's a serious fight, well, then it's going to be 2/3, as you said, if the mayor were to veto it. But so that's where I think I would be for putting it off.
Is there any other discussion? I don't see any hands.
Yes.
If there is no,
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, but Commission Chair Clegg has his hand raised, and so does Commissioner Rubenstein.
okay, let's go with Chair Clegg, and then I apologize, and then Commissioner Rubenstein after that.
Thank you. I agree that this is appropriate for continued discussion. I think the Board of Estimate and Taxation is obsolete, but I think the 2/3 requirement is inappropriate. It should be an absolute majority. And we should also take the temperature of the park board, because it was the vigorous park board opposition to this that killed it in 2009. And if they're still at the same place, there's not really much point in putting it on the ballot. Finally, my recollection of the 2009 proposal was that at the very last minute, they decided the ballot question language was not to eliminate the Board of Estimate and Taxation, because there were some references to the Board of Estimate and Taxation in state law. So instead of eliminating the board, they provided that the council, the city council, is the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So if you look back at the 2009 amendment, that's what it was changed to at the last minute. And we'd need to do some research to see where those references are and if we need to do the same thing this time.
Thank you, Chair Clegg. And before I go to Commissioner Rubenstein, perhaps I know the clerk mentioned yesterday that the new city LIM system has the ability to offer access to prior amendments, and maybe if we could be linked to the 2000 amendment and the documentation in the, not only from the Charter Commission, but from the City Council, that might be useful as we move forward on this.
Yes, Mr. Chair, happy to do that.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whatever I was going to say, I think has already been said, so I will just add my own 2 cents, which is I think this is a very good idea. This time has not come that we may end up with far too much on the ballot in November. And I think that we want to give some serious thought, because it does implicate how we do budget and how we do unbudgeted expenditures in a way. So it's something to think through a lot more carefully than we are able or probably want to do now.
I don't see any other hands at this time. And if I'm correct on that, then I would guess that we would need a motion, most likely to postpone this matter to a later date. And I'm presuming we would take this up again at some point after this year's election and start looking at this. We will still be busy with the redistricting, but at that time we will have the bandwidth. I mean, as indicated earlier, we are going to have probably 5 amendments on the ballot this year, and we are still not done with the reviews of any of them, really. So I think it would probably be appropriate to have such a motion. So if somebody wants to offer something
I'll
along
make a motion.
Second.
Okay. And the motion is to postpone this matter until after this year's election. I understand the motion, Commissioner Kozak?
Yep.
Okay. With that motion, is there any other discussion? I don't see any, and therefore I would ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Cohen. Commissioner Kozak.
Aye.
Commissioner Mecci.
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Cohen. Chair Ginder.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. And with that, I believe we have concluded all business that needs to come before this committee.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. I was just going to say that my plan is to have the report of this committee as a standing item on the Charter Commission's regular agenda. I mean, even if there is nothing to report, that's fine. But so you can report the results of this consideration at the next regular Charter Commission meeting. It's theoretically possible that the Charter Commission could say, no, wait, we want to do it, but unlikely. But I just wanted you to know that there'll be a standing committee report.
And thank you, Chair Clegg, you're absolutely correct. We do need to have the full commission then rule on this to postpone it until after the election. So thank you for bringing that back to my attention. And if I don't see any other discussion, I now believe we have completed our agenda. And without objection, we will stand adjourned. So thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Mr. Clerk.